So, thanks Chris for giving me the chance to do this. I appreciate that like most of you are probably like not religious. I'm not sure if that's like an unfair assumption. But like what I want to do is just sort of let you sort of into the head of a religious person in the hope that that might actually like, you know, let you debate about religious people sort of better. Because I guess there's sort of two ways that like religion plays into debate. One is obviously when you have like a religious topic. You want to know like what you're actually debating about. But the other thing I think which is probably more important and probably plays in quite a few debates is like religious stakeholders. And so if you want to defend religious stakeholders, it's probably really important that you understand what those religious stakeholders believe and what's important to them. And so that's what I sort of want to go through tonight. But before I do that, I want to like go through like a crash course in like basic theology for anyone who like doesn't know this stuff. Like I'm sure a lot of you probably understand some of the basics of like Christianity. But I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, and also maybe share with you some of like the finer points which might be relevant in a debate. So the first one we have is like Catholicism. So Catholicism is like the basic, is like the, I don't want to say like the main form of Christianity, but it's the most popular form of Christianity, and it's sort of the, I guess you'd say, the original form of Christianity. In that like it runs from, the whole idea of the Catholic Church is that it's the same church that Peter founded back, like, when Jesus died. So, you know, just your basic tenets of Catholicism. Obviously, one of the main differences between Catholicism and Protestantism is that the Catholic Church has a really central authority. Central authority lies with the Pope and his local bishops. It's really important when you're starting to sort of like talk about the fact that like it's not just the Pope who like controls stuff, because obviously the Pope is like in Rome and can't like do the heavy game stuff. So the local bishops actually carry the same amount of authority as the Pope does in his local areas. And of course, like the Pope can intervene in like local matters, and so we saw that. I don't know if you guys remember last year there was a Queensland bishop who was essentially saying stuff which like the Catholic Church didn't really agree with, and so the Pope did have to step in and like sack him. And so the Pope can like do that, but in terms of like your local area and in terms of like your local region, the bishop actually has you know, quite a bit of authority. The other thing which is really important to remember with Catholicism is that like their doctrines come from like Scripture, but also from tradition, so from the saints, and through like 2,000 years of like Christian history, and that's where a lot of like their teachings come from. And so it's not simply Catholics don't simply believe something because like it's in the Bible and it says that. That's like not the only source of like Catholic teaching. Catholics don't necessarily believe that like Scripture is inerrant, like it doesn't have any like mistakes, and Catholics like concede that like a lot of stuff in the Old Testament isn't necessarily true. So when people like point to like Old Testament like scriptures to say this is why we believe this, generally it's not Catholics that do that. It's Catholics get their teachings from like a broader sort of, you know, a broader range of things. And also probably really important, this is more broadly for Christianity as well, is that like one of the ideas in Christian theology is that Christ actually came to not replace, but fulfill all of the Old Testament stuff. And there's lots of places in the Gospels where he kind of just goes like, the Old Testament says this is like evidently wrong, and this is what the new thing is. And so it's important to remember that like when you're debating about Catholics and Christians, that they're not just simply sort of like, you know, obedient to the Old Testament. Like some of them are, obviously, and you get plenty of you guys who like will quote like, you know, numbers to you and like try and like make some weird law out of that. But that's not generally what most Christians sort of like buy into. Other differences is like Catholics venerate Mary and the saints, so they think that like saints and Mary are like a good conduit to like God, and they believe in the true presence of the Eucharist, and that's actually quite important in that like with Catholics, when there's like the Eucharist on the altar and it's been consecrated, they actually believe that's like literally God. So
I don't know what the Eucharist is.
Right, cool, yeah. So the Eucharist is like there's like at Mass, which is like the Catholic celebration, bread and wine is brought to the table, and then it undergoes a process called consecration. And what happens in consecration, as Catholics believe, is that literally becomes the body and the blood of Christ, as was done at the Last Supper. And so they literally believe that is God. And so when someone does something like to that, or takes that and like desecrates it, it's a very insulting thing to a Catholic, because it's as if you've actually just like attacked their God directly. This is a little bit different in Protestant theology, because they don't believe in the true presence in many forms of Protestantism. And they think it's more like symbolic, and what Jesus did was symbolic. But to a Catholic, it's actually very important, the Eucharist. By the way, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to like jump in and like interrupt me. So then, like, Protestantism.
James, can I actually ask a question before we move on?
Yeah.
What are the other things aside from the actual scripture that like play into Catholic beliefs? It's like the Pope makes decrees on stuff, yes?
Yeah. So what the Pope does is the Pope is infallible. So that means when the Pope says something, it has to be true to a Catholic. Having said that, there's like qualifiers to that. Like the Pope can only make like infallible statements about moral doctrines, right? So the Pope can't come up tomorrow and go like, climate change isn't real, and that makes climate change not real to Catholics. That's not how like infallible teaching works. It can't be about like science or anything like that. But the Pope releases like also encyclicals, and these like long, generally really long documents that take forever to read, and are full of like complex language. But they generally outline sort of things that Catholics believe, and the theology behind it is that not only did Jesus come and like tell us stuff, but like the Holy Spirit is like continually giving us more information and like helping us to adapt to new events and new ways, like new happenings in society. And so it's like through the popes and through especially the writings of the saints as well, the Church like forms its doctrine. And I'm going to speak about it a bit later. But that's one of the reasons that like the Catholic Church is very difficult to like change anything, because when you have like 2,000 years of like learning and tradition behind you, like to change something, you have to go like 2,000 years of people were wrong and I'm right. That's one of the reasons change can be really difficult. So now, like Protestants, they're both obviously all Christian, all believe that Jesus died, rose from the dead, just for our sins. So the idea that, salvation theology is pretty complex and no one really understands it. Like seriously, like even like complex theologians don't get quite how this works. But essentially the idea is Jesus died, he rose from the dead, and in doing that he our sins were forgiven. So that's like the basic. But then they have a few differences. So most Protestants, and I don't want to like slander any Protestants here who don't believe this, but this is just a general overview of a stereotypical Protestant, is they believe sola scriptura. So that means that they only believe stuff from the Bible. So if you say something and you say it's like this is a Christian doctrine, they'll ask you for a Bible and like tell you to point to where that teaching is. If it's not there, they like dismiss it. So they think that the Bible is like the only form of revelation you can have. I don't know if there's any Protestants here who want to disagree with that. You can. Feel free, like if you're like what I'm talking about and you like disagree, feel free to jump in because I'm probably wrong. Also, they believe that you're saved by faith alone, which is actually really important because like they think that once you, this is a bit complex as well, once you believe in Jesus, you're saved and you're going to heaven, and there's nothing that can happen to stop you from going to heaven. And they say that like you do good works because you've been saved, because you've had that faith, but like the good works don't lead you to heaven. Whereas the Catholic would say that like you do good work and that's why you get into heaven eventually, right? Like you're good so you go to heaven. Whereas the Protestant kind of goes, you're good because you've already been saved, and that's what Jesus does to you once he saves you. They don't believe in like the saints or Mary. They think that's really pagan, and they think it's like almost blasphemy to like pray to a saint. And also they have a very individualistic idea of salvation. So if you talk to a Protestant, they'll say, I've taken Jesus as my personal saviour, or I've been personally saved. Whereas the Catholic view of salvation is a bit different in that it kind of like it's more about the community, so you're saved as a community. And one of the results of that is that the Catholic Church generally then is more sort of like a big government, if you like, whereas Protestants are a bit more like sort of libertarian in their view. So like historically, the Catholic Church has always been like like for example, the Catholic Church is in favour of universal healthcare. The Catholic Church like is very much in favour of like government programs. It's kind of like we as a society have a responsibility to do these things. Whereas Protestants, especially in America, will often say we shouldn't have things like social welfare. What we should have is individual charity, because it's up to individuals to do charity. Whereas Catholics going to go, but we kind of are the government, and therefore the government should do it because it can do it better. So, any questions about like Protestants? No? Good. Islam. Now we get into areas that I'm not so well versed in, but I've done a little bit. So, essentially, Islam, there's a couple of basics you need to know. They believe in one God, only one God, no changes, completely unchangeable, no son, only one. That's basically it. The other core tenet is they believe that the Quran was dictated to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. And it's really important to understand that's like the dictated word of God. So it can't be wrong. It can't be like slightly off. It can't be like changed. It can't even be interpreted because it's the dictated word of God and you can't interpret God. I mean, obviously people do interpret it different ways, but if you talk to a really strict Muslim imam, they'll tell you you can't interpret it because this is what God said directly to Muhammad. They had their 5 pillars, so testimony, prayer, almsgiving, fasting, and pilgrimage. One of the key things there is that almsgiving is a big part of Islam. It's probably a bit which is overlooked a lot, but mosques actually do give large amounts of money to charities, and they do a lot of good charitable work, because it's one of the fundamentals. So if you're debating about Islam and its impact on society, it's really worth mentioning that that is one of the key tenets, because especially when you get debates sort of based in America, people sort of have this idea that Islam is just out to sort of, you know, kill and pillage and have this really bad characterization of Islam, whereas actually most Islamic people, most Islamic mosques probably do more for the community than most anyone else. So that's really important to remember.
So just before you move on,
yeah.
Just on the earlier stuff about the belief in the Quran and what it signifies. It was my understanding that there's also a wealth of other important things regarding Muslim beliefs, such as like the hadith, which are interpreted as statements that the Prophet made that might or might not necessarily have been as a result of Gabriel's dictation. So as a result of various interpretation of all those statements, you actually have quite a lot of variation within Islam. To say nothing of like the satanic verses, which are alleged to be verses where the devil was dictating to Muhammad instead of Gabriel. So there is actually quite like, you know, a lot.
Yeah, and that's true, and it's probably worth, if you want to go and like, you know, research that, you're right, because there are a lot of things which like different Muslims like interpret differently, and there's also a range of other Islamic texts which people sort of draw from, and especially, I'm going to talk in a second, like Sunnis and Shias actually interpret those differently as well. So I think, I can't remember strictly, but I think it might be that Shias believe in these sort of extra these sort of extra verses, and like Sunnis don't. That I may have that mixed up, but and that's a big cause of like problems, because they say you're like disobeying Muhammad, and the other group saying that we're the only ones obeying Muhammad, and that can cause a lot of tension. So the other like fundamental difference which you absolutely need to know is that the main difference between the two really is that they interpret like who the next guy after Muhammad should have been. So the Sunnis, who make up like 90% of the Muslim population, and like go through all of like Southeast Asia, India, not really India, but like mainly like Pakistan, and then also have big populations, like sorry, not Pakistan, Pakistan's shit. But like in Southeast Asia, and generally they're the majority most places, they believe that Muhammad's father-in-law should have taken over, and they believe that like imams should be like elected democratically. And so that like you should pick who you want to be the next imam based on who is like the best qualified. And that's the main difference. And then you have the Shias who say that Muhammad's son-in-law and cousin, you can work that one out, was his rightful successor. And the imams, like it goes through, like it goes through family lines. And so the only people who can be imams are people who are directly descended from that line. And then what that means is then they have, similar to Catholics, they have like, they don't call them saints, but they have holy imams who they have pilgrimages to their shrines. And that's another big point of division between the two. Because on one hand, the Shias go, you're disrespecting these great holy people. And the Sunnis go, but those aren't great holy people. You're not worshipping Allah when you do this, therefore you guys are wrong. And that can be a form of like making sense as well. Any other questions about Islam? Okay, cool. And then Judaism, fairly straightforward. Again, if anyone is Jewish here, that's cool, and wants to correct me, that's fine. Okay, cool. Yeah, so basically, the idea of Judaism is you believe in one, they believe in one God. It's one of the really important things about the Jewish people is they believe that God revealed himself to the Jews, but something that a lot of people understand, this doesn't mean that he thinks that Jews are better than everyone else. In fact, it means that like they're the people who he wants to use as an example, I guess. But Jews actually believe that all human beings are equal. And in fact, like unlike other religions, Jews don't have this idea of like conversion precisely because of this, because they think that in fact, like being a Jew is really difficult. And so if you want to like convert to Judaism and you go to a rabbi, he'll go, I don't think you should do it. If you go to him again, he'll go, I don't think you should do it. If you go to him a third time, he'll say, I don't think you should do it again. And then if you go to a fourth time, you're like, fine, you can do it. And that's because they're meant to just go with you 3 times. And so that's like one of the, I think, the fundamental differences in sort of philosophy between Jews and Christians, is that they don't have this sort of idea they have to preach to everyone and make everyone Jewish. And it means they're far more happy to sort of sit back and go, yeah, you guys can do what you want, as long as you don't like infringe on us or like tell us we can't circumcise our kids. Which I'll talk about later. So that's like the crash course, like about religion. So obviously, it's not really like complex like overview of their theology. I think like especially I've only done the monotheistic religion, so I think it's really important that, especially if you maybe go into a country at an international tournament, which is maybe set in a country where like Buddhism or Hinduism is prevalent, it's probably a really good idea to go and look at those religions and study the intricacies, because far more likely they're going to come up. But like I think in a context of sort of Australian debating, it's probably fair to say that Christianity and Islam and Judaism are the ones that sort of come up because they're the ones that like lots of people believe, and that's where there's conflict. So now moving on to the more fun stuff. How do you understand a religious person? So the first thing that I want to say about understanding religious people is that like religion is at the centre of a religious person's life. So there is no it affects everything you do. So for me as a like strong Catholic, like everything I do, I have to think about how does this impact my faith? How does my faith inform this action? And so it isn't like a separate thing which I can just sort of like say is over there in a corner. It might be for some people, like I'll talk about in a minute. But for me, if like every aspect of my life has to do with my faith, and for anyone who's like deeply religious, I think that's the same. And then the next thing is that my faith will trump everything, right? So because I believe in God, and because I believe that God is like all powerful and has the ability to like send me to heaven, it means that like no matter what a government does or what society does, your religion is going to come first. So for people who are strictly religious, it doesn't matter what anyone else does, what your faith wants you to do is always going to come up top.
Question on that. So does that mean a strictly religious person would break the law because they thought that religion was right in the instance where they convicted?
Yes, and my next slide like does that.
Very good.
The other thing is like generally religious people like genuinely believe what we say we believe. As in like I know that like whenever you have these debates, like people will say sort of like you're not really an atheist or you're not really Christian. Like in debating, it's probably a good idea to just like accept that people genuinely believe what they say they believe. Also, it's not, as most religious people, it's not really born of ignorance. Like people like me have thought about this stuff and we've come to sort of like logical, rational conclusions. Whether or not you agree they're logical and rational is up to you. But like it's not simply like religious people haven't thought about it. Like obviously there probably are some religious people who are religious who haven't thought about it. But there's probably some atheist people who are atheists who haven't thought about it. As well. So it's just best when you're characterising religious people, characterise them as like smart and, you know, at least having given some thought to what they're talking about. And then the final thing, which is actually really important, is that people who see religion, people often sort of mistake religion and see it like as a kind of philosophy. And that's a mistake because like people see religion as like fundamentally true as opposed to like good for society or right. So it's more like science in that way. So I generally believe that like, you know, Jesus was God in the same way I believe that gravity is gravity, right? Like It's a fundamental truth, and it's not something which like you can sort of just like interpret or throw away. So now religious motivations, and this is important. So religious motivations. Why do religious people do things? First of all, a religious person will do something because they think it's like objectively good. And this is something which like I think a lot of people have, is this idea of objective good. But for a religious person, you have objectivity, and you have objectivity based in God. And so you do something simply because you think it's good. Like apart from anything else, the reason why religious people like help the poor, oppose abortion, because they think that doing those things is objectively the right thing to do, and you just do the right thing to do, and there's no further like justification to it. And so like it's not a utilitarian thing, it's not a right thing, it's just like objective. Some people call it divine command theory, the idea that you do something because God told you to do it. I don't think it's not that clear in like especially Catholic theology. It isn't that straightforward, but if you want to think about it that way, that's fine. The other way is because people will do things to please God. So not just because they're like good, but because God wants us to do them, and because also they're good for us. So things like the sacraments. Like I receive the sacrament, I go to Mass on Sunday because I think that's what God wants me to do, and I think that's what's in my best interest. Be like things like receiving the Eucharist is something really fulfilling for my spiritual life. And so that's why you do it. The other one, which is one everyone sort of talks about and knows about, and that's afterlife consequences. So that's why like I go to confession, that's why I don't steal stuff, because like if I do, I might go to hell, and that's really bad. And it works inversely too. So a religious person, like a secular person, is always accountable for their actions, or at least they think they're always accountable for their actions, which is effectively the same thing. So they will always be considering that. One of the things that they also do is, one of the reasons that they also do things is because a lot of religious people have this vehement idea that they have to save others as well. And so that's why they preach, and that's why like you might get someone come up to your face and go, if you're homosexual, you go to hell. Those people, as disgusting as vile as that is, those people often genuinely believe they're doing you a favour. And they genuinely believe that by doing that, they're going to save you from burning in hell forever. That's the mindset those people approach that with. And so it's important when you talk about them in debates to actually even though you may think their actions are wrong, to actually give them the credit to say that these people aren't sort of intrinsically evil. They are actually just doing what they think is the right thing. They might be I think they're wrong. I think they're wrong in that. And I think we can all say they're probably deluded in doing that. But they generally believe that, and that's their prerogative to do it. And then finally, and this is an important one, especially with people's voting habits, religious people will vote simply because they want to live in a society that God approves of. So I have lots of especially elderly religious people who just if you ask them why they oppose gay marriage, they'll tell you because God opposes gay marriage, and they vote that way because of it. And you might say that's bad for society. You might say that's wrong. But that's their prerogative, and one of the things about a democracy is we don't get to tell people what to vote on the basis of. And arguably it's more dangerous to stop people from voting than it is to allow people to vote on those sorts of things. And the other thing is if a large percentage of the society is very religious, then it's probably fair enough that they do get to vote to live in a society which is pleasing to that religion. And obviously you can talk about things like minority rights in that debate, but from a religious standpoint, I will vote for candidates which I believe sit well with my religion, simply because that's what I believe the best society is. And like I said, with any political thing, you can disagree with that, you may think my idea of what a good society is just wrong, but that's my prerogative to do it. Then you have sort of what's fundamentally important to a religious person. Fundamentally, the right to practice my faith, both privately and publicly, is absolutely important to me as a person. So, if I wasn't able to go to Mass, or if I wasn't able to talk about religious ideas, it would be sort of detrimental to me as a human being. Because, like I said before, it is so fundamentally essential. So it's not just me attending a church every Sunday. It's my ability to then process through the streets, to have symbols going through the streets, and it's also my ability to stand up on a pedestal and like say those beliefs and actually advocate those sorts of beliefs in the political sphere. The other one that's really important is like the right to raise your children as your religion. So for me, I want to raise my kids as Catholics because I believe that is the best way to raise my children, and because I believe that I want to raise them in truth, and Catholicism is true. And so to a religious parent, and especially to like a Jewish parent who wants to circumcise their child, that's like fundamentally important. If you take that right away, you're taking away what they see as like a fundamental right as a religious person. And they want to be able to, the other thing is work and live in accordance with their faith. So the example I've got here is like, just say you're a Christian doctor who doesn't believe in abortion. You want to be able to have a practice and maintain your medical license without referring people to abortion, because you see abortion as morally wrong, and therefore you don't want to partake in that action. So it's important to a Christian doctor that he doesn't have to do that. And that's one of the things which is like fundamental, to be able to live in accordance with your faith. Yes, Jeff.
I have a question. Sorry, I'm being really selfish, but I've done this about a million times. Do you think a Christian doctor would find it morally equivalent to perform the abortion themselves as to refer somebody to get an abortion? Or would they see a difference in those two actions?
It's a good question. I think there probably is a difference. I think you would see there is like a little bit of a difference, but probably they're both like really, really bad.
So they really oppose referrals as well?
Absolutely, because like while it's not the same as like performing an abortion, you are partaking in an abortion. And what you have to understand is like to a religious person, abortion is like kills a human being, and so it's the equivalent of like killing a 1-year-old. The religious people simply don't see a difference. And so when you say you have to refer to an abortion, what you're saying to a Christian is you have to refer someone to kill a child, and that's the fundamental belief. So that's kind of what you're asking them to do, and so it's really important that you get that when you're doing a debate. But now, nextly, and this is what Tim was talking about before, is the consequences of what happens when you like stop religious people from doing these things. So the first thing is, like I said before, like it's a massive impact on a religious person's quality of life. Like these things are like so important to a person, and like because especially like my identity is so wrapped up with my religion. If I can no longer do those things, it means just generally I'm going to suffer as a result. But the other main consequence that you can have if you have like laws which target religious people is that religious people are going to end up defying the law. Because the thing is, if you believe that God is like up there and he's like really powerful and that he can send you to heaven, generally people like any like law. Like you're prepared to go to jail if it means like defending him. And like for me personally, I would definitely go to jail before I stopped going to mass. Like I would try and go to mass like underground. If I was caught, I would happily go to jail because I think that my religion is that important to me. And it was really important too, I think, like in that debate that we had about like confession, and it's what my team actually argued, is that like the result you'd have from like forcing priests to reveal what they hear in the confessional, one of the main results you have is you'd have many priests going to jail because they simply value their religion more than they value like what the law says. And so you have to sort of like balance what the results are. Because I'd argue in that case you're not going to end up with more information, you're just going to end up with more priests in jail because they think their religious liberty is being infringed upon. And that's really important when you're sort of thinking about religious people, is that it does come first. Yeah.
Could you kind of like perhaps flesh out that grey area a little bit more? So obviously, if there was a law banning you from going to mass, I would view that as quite an unjust law as well, and I wouldn't be surprised if people defended it. In your mind, what would kind of be the outer limits of that sphere of religious practice that you would break the law to incur? Are there any religious practices that you would moderate as a result of the law, speaking hypothetically? Obviously, we have to
cross in a school or whatever.
Obviously, we have to imagine that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting like concept because like I like talk to groups of like Catholic students quite a bit about politics and I have a thing that's like where do you draw the line? Because often like Catholics will want to talk about like, especially conservative Catholics will want to talk about things like banning the burqa and doing things like that. But then of course when it comes to like Catholic things they go, oh, you can possibly stop that, right? And like one of the things with banning the burqa, and like I told you about with like people defying the law, is that maybe people who wear burqas wouldn't defy the law, they just wouldn't leave their house, right? Like that's the kind of consequences that you get from these sorts of laws. But it's really important because in these debates you do have to say where do you draw the line? Like there are some things which I think clearly we think that the law should stop. So things like female circumcision, or like some religion which says like beating your wife is okay. Obviously, we think secular laws need to come first. But like, then there's like more grey areas, like with a Catholic teacher, like with a Catholic school hiring like a Catholic teacher. Like should Catholic schools be allowed to hire Catholic teachers simply to keep teaching Catholic schools, and should they be able to discriminate against, say, someone who has been like had a child out of wedlock? That's when you get into the far more grey area of where do you draw the line between religious freedom and like secular law. And I don't know where to draw the line. As a Christian, like I think that I wouldn't use a religious thing to justify my political beliefs. And I think it's quite reasonable to sort of not have religious symbols everywhere in a secular building. But like if you talk about like the core tenets of your faith, and you talk about things like I guess a better example is like women priests. Like some people would say like you are breaking the law because you're discriminating against women by not having women priests. But as a Catholic, like the theology is so important that like I think people would in a sense defy that law. Because it is like just fundamental to the theology, and it's not like you can simply change it. It's the theology behind it, which is quite complex, says this. Therefore, it's not about like the law changing makes you change it. I just can't change it. But where you draw that line is a really difficult question.
So I realise that, in fact, that wording the question made it more difficult than anyone could possibly hope to answer. What I really meant was, is there a binary category of, say, core and non-core promises, so to speak? or would you characterise it more as a spectrum, where, I mean... No. Like, I'm being honest. Like, are there some things that would just be not countenance and other things that are outside of, as you say, the core principles of that religion that might be negotiated on? Or do you see it as a continuum where everything is negotiated in a historical context?
I would say, like, my answer to that as like a Catholic would just be like, no, right? Like, there just isn't sort of one Catholic teaching which I'd be prepared to give up, because it's all pretty important. And when you look at it from the perspective of like a Catholic person, and you think, like I said before, like you've got God all powerful up there, like watching you. Like from that perspective, like even the smallest teaching becomes really, really important as it comes out to trump other things. And so I don't think there is a spectrum. I think there's probably like some religions, and this will vary from religious person to religious person. Like some people would say, oh well, I like the idea of being Catholic. I don't think there should be women priests. However, I can see the secular argument. I can see that I'll accept that. So some religious people probably will do that. But will I personally? No. That's the other important thing. Is like the other thing you get when you have like religious laws is that religious people will segregate themselves. And trust me, I've seen this firsthand. So religious people, when they feel that laws are being attacking them, especially the best example is just like homeschooling. So when people thought that even Catholic schools or the Christian schools weren't like teaching the faith properly, and they didn't make it like a public school, they thought it was actually going to be like bad for them. What they did, they took their kids out and they started homeschooling them. And that's what will happen when you start passing the laws against religion, is that religious people will just start segregating themselves into small communities. And one of the other byproducts of that is that they just become like more and more extreme because they've been segregated. So it's really important to consider that. Like a lot of your sort of really right-wing religious people come from those segregated communities. Yes.
Hi, just a very brief point about your slide. It could also be rephrased to reflect an opposing perspective, consequences of imposing religious things on people, massive impact on quality of life for non-religious individuals, non-religious people defying the law, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. And I think that I think the essence comes from when you sort of try and force someone to live in a way which isn't in line with their beliefs. Because I think you're right. If you have like religious symbols like everywhere, that means like for a strictly really atheistic person, that means their life, living their life how they want to live it, very difficult. So I think it's about balancing those two things. And the thing is, I don't want to come up here and say that like necessarily because of these consequences, like we shouldn't do anything which restricts religious freedom. I think in many circumstances we should. But it's important, especially when we're debating about it, that we understand the real present consequences for religious people. Yes?
Hypothetically, what would happen if the Pope said tomorrow, we're scrapping confession?
He won't. He can't. He literally can't. It's like a core teaching. The Pope can't change something which has already been said, and he can't change like a already established doctrine. Hypothetically, if he did, it would be a really interesting situation. You probably have Catholics breaking away. You already have had, like, after Vatican II, right? So I've got it as an example later on, but we probably won't get to it. Massive number of Catholics did break away, and to this day they say, the Pope isn't the real Pope. These people make me look ridiculously liberal. Like, in fact, they call me liberal. Like, crazy liberal. And they don't believe in the Pope. They think that he's heretical because he, like, talks to Protestants. They don't think Mass should be said in English at all. And so, yeah, so this is like, and like, I have friends of people who are like this, so don't get me wrong, they're fine people. But like, when you have something like that happen, people do just break away. Like, it's not, people don't see, like I said, it's difficult to break away from being Catholic because, like, if you think that Catholicism is like the true church, then how do you break away from the true church? But it does happen. So then, I'll go quickly through these. So just, the idea that in a debate, I've seen this done really badly, is that, like, people characterise religious people really poorly, and one of the reasons is they don't, like, take into account that there are different types of religious people. So, the types I've got are radicals, conservatives, moderates, and liberals. So, radicals is people who use violence, or can use violence for intimidation, tactics, like Westboro Baptist Church, like, classic example of, like, someone who's like a radical person who thinks that anyone who doesn't hold their beliefs is not only wrong, but like should be shunned, should be attacked, should be protested against, and that like, and I think like elements of the Muslim Brotherhood are probably the same. Radical Islam says if you're not Islamic, you're just wrong and get out of my country. Then of course you have like conservatives. Conservatives are kind of what I am, although maybe not quite as conservative as some. And then the idea is they adhere to all basic teachings, often involve themselves in politics, strongly socially conservatives, will defy the law if they think the law is against their faith, and like examples are like Cardinal Pell, Rick Santorum, and like Orthodox Jews are good examples of like conservative religious people. Then you have your moderates, they're basically like your general religious people. They respect most tenets. They generally like believe things like abortion are wrong, but they just don't involve themselves necessarily, and they don't really care that much. They are just more private about their religious beliefs. They're not as outspoken, and they're less likely to oppose like unfriendly laws. And then you have this like final category, which is like liberals, which I'm not sure if anyone here considers themselves a liberal Christian. But often with liberal Christians, they follow certain aspects of the faith, but they aren't afraid to like stand up against other aspects which they don't like. But for some liberals, like the supernatural elements of religion are less important than social justice aspects of religion. These people often use their like faith as a justification for being socially progressive, and they generally hate like religious conservatives. So those two tend to be enemies. And like so, you have the ACL, and then you have like people shutting down the ACL, saying that don't represent like Christian people. And so yes. So now I want to go on to like the benefits of religion.
Sorry.
Yes.
Who are Rainbow Catholics?
Rainbow Catholics are a group that I think they're mainly in Sydney at the moment. And essentially it's like an archdiocese, it's like a parish, it's like a legitimate parish too, which is a big cause of debate. Which have like mass for openly gay people, and they give communion to openly gay people, and it's a huge fight in the church over whether or not that parish is allowed to exist. But also, people, I don't know if you remember, like there was a priest in Brisbane a couple of years ago who like started like saying that God, like he preached a sermon and said like God's not real, but it doesn't matter. And he was kicked out, but he still has a church and he still like does his stuff, and I don't know why. God, so like, that's what he does, and that's what all like liberal Christians say. They say we don't really care about whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. We don't see it as that important. What we do think is important is like the Sermon on the Mount. Yes.
In terms of non-religious people providing their own commentary,
yeah.
How easily offended would religious people be?
It's a good question. Varies. It's what I mean, it depends on who you're talking to. So like, one of the things I've got to understand, and like I think a good example is like Pussy Riot is a good example in Russia at the moment, right? And that like, I certainly don't agree that they should be locked up in jail for 2 years. But having said that, I also think they did something wrong, right? Like I think, and I found what they did offensive. But you don't understand, when you dance on like the altar, you're dancing on where God has been for me. So that, and like, doing what I consider obscene things where God has been. And Pussy Riot knew they were obscene to me, right? So they went out deliberately to offend me. And so by things like that, yeah, I do get offended. Do I think that my offence should be against the law? Yeah, probably not. But you do get offended quite easily when you're talking about like your God. And like I know that I was talking to one of my friends who is Muslim, and I said, what would be the result if I put a picture of Muhammad up on the board? And he said, it would be as if you just insulted my entire family, myself, and my entire faith. And because it's that personal to someone, that they take something like that as a clear attack on who they are. And yeah, so religious people do offend easily. But I think sometimes they're probably justified in feeling offended, because I think sometimes people probably wrongly go out of their way to offend religions, because maybe they don't agree with the religion. But should that be against the law? Probably not. But then, benefits of religion. So I would say that a religion provides someone with a sort of a moral compass, a sense of right and wrong, sort of a direction to live their lives. Certainly for me, my faith informs what I believe is right and wrong. And it gives, like I said, that sort of a sense of objective good and evil, helps me make those sorts of decisions. It motivates charity, which I've got on my next slide. Yes?
Do you believe that there are other moral teachings that are outside your religion? Like if in the Bible there was absolutely nothing about stealing whatsoever, would stealing be a moral action, or at least not an immoral one?
Yeah, well I can only speak as a Christian here. So like to a Christian, right, we don't think that like morals like are written in the Bible and therefore that's why there's morality. We think that like there is right and wrong. That right and wrong is like based in God, but like that everyone knows that right and wrong. So it's not like the Ten Commandments didn't like set down moral authority, and before that there was no moral authority, right? Like everyone knew these things were wrong, and I would say that we all know that certain things are wrong, like objectively wrong. You guys just don't realise that it comes from God. Right? So people like Confucius, great moral teachers, Gandhi, great moral teacher, and they're just teaching moral laws which come from God, even though they don't know it. Yeah, but certainly, like, people will go, oh, you think because I'm an atheist I can't be a good person. Nah, bullshit, that's not true. Then give people, like, a real sense of, like, belonging. And, like, the other thing is, like, even if you accept, like, whether or not you accept that faith is true or not, like, people who belong to a religion generally feel that they belong to something, feel they're part of something. And that's really important for a lot of people. And taking that away from someone can be really devastating to their, like, personal sense of identity. And obviously you can like feel part of other things, right? So you can feel part of a sports club, you can feel part of a social club, you can feel part of MAD if you want to. When you feel that you're part of a religion, it's sort of a higher thing, and like to some people, that's what they feel they belong to, and that's probably for some people the only place that will get that sense of belonging. And so that's a big plus. It also gives people a sense of purpose. Like it gives me a reason, my faith gives me a reason to get out of bed in the morning. I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm meant to be doing. And for me, that's where I get my sense of like direction from. And like I said before, like, I'm not saying that you guys don't have direction. I'm sure you've all got direction in your life. But for me, that's where I draw my sense of direction from. And the other thing that I think is relevant, especially like in debates where you have like war-torn situations, famine and hopeless situations, what religions do is they give you like a sense of hope. They give people like a reason to keep going, and they give people a reason to like believe that the world is good. And that's one of the things, like, because as a Christian, I believe in good and evil, but I believe that like good has already conquered evil, and good will win the day in the end, right? So as an atheist, it's hard to believe that because I don't know why you would. But if someone's got a reason to believe that's going to happen, fine, cool. But like, we really believe that like good will conquer, and so that's the reason to be hopeful. Now the next one, and that's one of the important ones that I think is relevant in sort of one specific way, and that's the idea of like churches.
So it's something completely irrelevant to this stuff.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you think, in terms of like all those things, charity and stuff like that, if you think a religious organisation is better able to administer that, even if it involves administering it to other religious organisations, or if a secular organisation is better able to, considering there are different types of religions.
It's hard to say. I think that is like better able to like do it, because I don't think like a religious person is better able to distribute food to people whether they're religious or not. I think that always depends on how well organised the person is. And I would also say that I don't think necessarily intrinsically a Catholic person is going to do more charity than a non-Catholic person. What I would say is if you have a look at like the poorest places in the world, the people that do the charity work, the people that are there, are generally religious. And one of the distinguishments that I would want to point out is that, like, obviously you have some great, like, secular charities like the Red Cross and so forth, and they do obviously great work. But if you go to those places and you find people who are living in the same conditions as the people they're helping, generally those people are religious. That doesn't happen generally with secular people. And so I'm not going to come here and, like, say why that is, because I think that, you know, secular people have just as much motivation to help people as non-religious people. But if you look historically, Christians are the ones that do it. And this also, like, comes into this point, right? Because one of the big debates you always have is, like, should churches get, like, a tax exemption? And it's, like, whenever I talk to like a hardcore, like, atheist who wants, like, hates me, this is the first thing he says, like, your churches get, like, a tax exemption. The reason churches get tax exemptions is because they actually do grassroots charity work themselves, and that's, like, a core principle and a core, like, reason the church exists. And so it's not that they, like, have a charity which does this stuff, it's just that parishioners themselves go out and they go and, like, visit elderly people. They run soup kitchens. They visit hospitals. They provide free counselling. They have, like, emergency funds for people who come to them and need help. They provide food when people, like, comes to, like, the presbytery. The priest will often give them that stuff. And so it's impossible to separate the two out. And that's why, like, churches do have that tax exemption. And, like, they don't make a big deal of it normally. And so it's hard to, like, see it happening. But what I'd argue in a debate is that, like, you would notice it when it's gone. So when those churches and those things aren't there to support those people, suddenly there's going to be a big gap, and it's not clear who would fill that gap. Now, religion and public policy. So on one level, like, I can't just go, well, you know, I don't think religion should much influence on public policy for obvious reasons. So I think that religious people should be able to influence public policy as long as they use proper arguments. And that's one of the things I want to point out too, is that generally when religious people, like, have these debates, they don't generally, like, go, the Bible says this, therefore we should do this. Generally they do make arguments. Certainly when I argue these things, I make arguments which I think are acceptable for anyone. So the first thing that I think religion brings to public policy is, like, a sense of moral conscience. So the idea of, like, objective right and wrong, and it's not just what's popular, it's what's actually, like, right and wrong, sort of for all time. And even though a conscience may not always be popular, that's what I think religion can actually bring. It's a sense of it's not just what's beneficial, it's what's, like, actually the right thing to do. And so one of the things that's, like, frustrated me is that there's been a lot of discussion recently about, like, having American troops in the Northern Territory. And there's been a lot of, the discussion always seems to be about is this good for Australia, is this bad for Australia? Whereas I think the question should be, is having troops in the Northern Territory the morally right thing to do? And I think that's the dimension that religion can bring. The other thing I put down here, which I'm not sure how much weight it carries, but religious lawmakers are actually accountable. So if I do something like, and I, like, commit fraud, I'm still accountable to God, right? Like, as far as an atheist person, they're not really accountable to anyone if they don't get caught. For me, I'm stuck. Like I'm always being watched. And the other thing is what I was saying before, is that just historically, religions have brought forward the voice of the poor and the rejected. And that keeps going. So you may know names like Father Bob McGuire, Father Frank Brennan. These are people who bring to the floor the plight of the poor, the plight of the homeless. And I think that's really important too. They just so, like, guys, this is something which is morally wrong and something we need to fix. So now, obviously, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking now, oh, but, like, you know, the church says things which we don't agree with. That's true, right? But there are things which I think everyone agrees on, which the church does do really well. So it does advocate for the homeless really well. It does advocate for the poor really well. And it does, like, actually, like, the Protestant Anglican Church in Britain recently has been, like, attacking, like, hardcore capitalism quite openly. And so don't think that, you know, religion is just this one-way conservative thing. Because in fact, the Catholic Church, especially, if you read a document which is called Rerum Novarum, which is, like, the Catholic Church's social teaching, it's really, really big on, like, not being, like, capitalist and, like, giving to the poor and having a society which is distributed. So, like, everyone is relatively equal, everyone has food, and that, like, there shouldn't be, like, big central corporations. And so don't, like, necessarily, like, equate the church with, like, the Liberal Party, because it's not. And, like, coming from someone who's run for the DLP, the Liberal Party, sure, I think. So then you've got, like, so the next thing is, like, secularism. and I'm going to go quickly through these. But so essentially, there are two forms of secularism. First form of secularism is like passive secularism, and so this says that like essentially the government should not favour any one religion, but it shouldn't discriminate against religions because they are religious. So this would say that you can have religious symbols in government buildings, you can have prayer at the start of Parliament, and that to like get rid of these things specifically because they are religious would be discrimination. And also, passive secular society generally allows exemptions for religious people to protect religious freedom. And that is then opposed to aggressive secularism, which is obviously the opposite, right? So it's like secularism, which says you can't have any government money for any religious organisation, you can't have religious symbols inside a government building, and that you can't have exemptions for religious people. And so they're the two conceptualizations of secularism which you'll have to argue for in a debate. Anytime you have religion, one side's probably going to bring up secularism, and you have to show why your secularism is like better than their secularism. And I mean the reality is that probably like in Australia we probably have a mix of the two, right? We probably have we kind of do have the idea that like, and I think the High Court recently found when they talked about like school chaplains, that like it would be wrong to not give money to a school chaplaincy program simply because that chaplaincy program is religious, but that it would be wrong to give money to a chaplaincy program if it only sponsors one type of religion. And so we do have like somewhere in the middle of that. And America again probably have like America probably conversely have like a more strictly like aggressive secularism in the society, and yet the response to that means there's more radically conservative Christian people. So the more like radical you go, the more radical like the response is. And so then there's like responses. I think we've sort of touched on these already, but like the Christian response is obviously really fearful that they won't be able to practice their religion. They're really worried that like it's going to infringe on their religious liberty. Christians are afraid that like this will turn us into an ungodly society. If you talk to like any like strict Catholic person, they'll tell you, one of the first things they'll tell you is what happens in a secular society is that you lose all kind of moral value, and so you get things where like 6-year-olds are wearing like provocative clothing. Like they'll take that and point to that as an example of something where values have been lost. So then also the Jewish response to secularism, like I said before, is like less aggressive than the Christian response because they don't have this idea of preaching, they don't have this idea of like having to go out and be so public about it. But at the same time, they're generally afraid that like secularism can actually lead to anti-Semitism. So the sort of protests you get against Max Brenner, if you talk to a Jewish person, they'll say that's maybe the result of a secular society. And again, they're afraid that there's like customs and laws are going to be infringed upon by the secular state. So things like circumcision is a good example. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question which I think is probably most relevant for debating. Can you give some examples of moderation? So, I mean, obviously the response to secularism could be, as you've said, problematic, but the other arguable response is that the church will moderate and become more modern or whatever. So, are there examples of moderation? Like, am I correct in saying that the Pope recently said that abortion was okay if the life of the woman was at risk or something, or am I just making that up? I could be making that up, but...
Probably, I don't know that. I've never heard that. I doubt that it was true.
But he has said recently the condoms are okay.
So the example, that's a better example. So the example he gave was like where you had we have two gay men in Africa, one of whom has AIDS. He said like using a condom then is okay. And in fact, if you're gay, like the church doesn't say anything about not using condoms because the church is using contraceptives, not condoms. So like, there's nothing contraceptive about, like, using condoms. But yeah, so essentially the Pope came around and said, like, look, if it was up to us, we would say, like, don't have gay sex, right? That's what the church would say. But it's saying that, like, if you're going to, or if you're going to have sex with a and you have AIDS, using a condom is better than not using a condom in that situation. So yeah, it's a matter of saying like the church does moderate itself and say like under these circumstances this is better.
Are there any other examples?
Perhaps a better example is when the Utah was being considered entry into the United States. The US said we will only allow Utah to be part of the Union if the Mormon Church gives up polygamy. Lo and behold, there was a divine revelation to the Council of Elders of the Mormon Church that polygamy was no longer a core tenet of that part of Mormonism.
Okay, is there an example from the last 100 years?
The Anglican Church is gaining democracy.
Yeah.
The Anglican Church is gaining democracy.
Yeah, well, if you look at like my third next slide.
No.
Sorry.
It's good. It's a good example.
Oh,
So
Praise them.
wouldn't Vatican II itself be an example? With a lot, Vatican II itself, with they also
That's
have.
my other example.
Alright, let's all stop speaking.
Yeah, sorry. But yeah, so I've got 4 minutes, so I'm going to go through this quickly. So we're essentially talking about reform in religion, where religion will change. Now, what I would say is that religions don't reform
James,
themselves.
got a little bit longer. 6:30 from Peter's getting out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Got a little longer.
Oh, okay, well, I've got, alright. Okay, so religions have a habit of staying pretty consistent, and like my example I give is the Catholic Church. Is that like it's stayed pretty much the same for 2,000 years. It hasn't like its core doctrines actually haven't changed that much, and I'll get to that when we talk about Vatican II. And then often when you do have changes, those changes are more aesthetic. So they sort of adapt to a new sort of society, a new way of worshipping, but generally the core things don't change that much. And certainly with like Judaism, certainly with like Islam, generally the core principles stay the same. And there are exceptions to that rule, but I think it is reasonable in a debate to say that religion generally is pretty static. When radical changes do occur, generally you have a split rather than a straightforward progression. So it's very rare that you have like one religion decide as a whole that we're all going to start ordaining gay priests now. Like that just doesn't happen. Like you always have one group says we can, one group says we can't. And that's generally the reality of what happens. And so you do get that splitting effect. And one of the other consequences of the splitting effect is you might get this sort of like really liberal church which you're a big fan of, but then the problem is you've taken all the liberals out of this church and they become like rampantly conservative. And so you get this sort of like two distinct type of churches. But then the other final thing is even those people who do make radical change don't generally like think of it as themselves as radically religious. Generally, you don't think you're ever changing what you're doing because you can't, because God's always the same thing. But you can say that, well, our ethos has changed, and that our charism has changed. So our charism being just essentially your like religious mission. And so we think that this is what, if like this is the new society, and therefore we think to be truly ancient, we have to have women priests in the society. So it's not changing our core beliefs; it's just sort of like adapting them to the new way. Even though, like, to be honest with you, sometimes I think those explanations are a piss weak. Like, I think that some people's churches just reform themselves, and they are like, for example, the ordination of women. It's a pretty radical reform, and those who try and say like it was just like an adaptation, I think is pretty soft. But now, sort of, let's have a bit like why it's really difficult for religions to reform themselves. And the fundamental reason, right, is because religions see themselves as being like absolutely fundamentally true. And when you think that you're absolutely fundamentally true, truth doesn't change, and therefore you don't change yourself that much. So unlike like a society or philosophy, like if you think this is God's law, which you've obeyed for like 2,000 years, it's a big deal to try and like swap it or change it to something. And the whole ethos, and I know this is true within Catholics, is that like we know that like a lot of stuff we believe now isn't necessarily popular, but like a lot of the time the Catholic Church hasn't necessarily been popular, and so we don't base our beliefs on what we think is popular. We base them on what we believe is true, and that's the same pretty much for generally any religion. Is that like if you believe what you have is right and it's like ordained by God, it means changing that is really difficult. So then the other thing is like I said before, if you have thousands of year tradition behind you, which generally religions do, like especially in religion like Judaism, it makes reform quite tough because like I said before, you have to say that like everyone else in the past is wrong and everyone else, and like now we're right or I'm right. Especially if you're a pope, you've got to say all your predecessors were wrong and now I'm right. So that can be a big problem. The other thing is like the authoritative nature of religions make change really difficult. So generally when you do get change in society, it comes from the bottom, like it comes from people. The problem is that with like a church like the Catholic Church, you generally get generally a few people make the decision, and like if they don't like something which the congregation is doing, they just tell them to stop it, right? So that makes change really, really difficult because these people hold on to these ideas of truth, and so therefore it doesn't matter if the congregation thinks they're wrong, they just don't care. But then you do get religions where it's like where congregations do have a say, and when you have that, generally the result is like those churches continually like break away from each other. When you have like democracy inside a church, what happens is not like you all get together and you vote, and like one of you says this and like half says this, half says that, and the half that loses goes, oh okay, we lost. It means they generally like break away and form their own church. And then inside that church there's another disagreement, and there's another thing, and another breakaway, and another breakaway. And that's why you have so many different types of like Protestant churches now. To the point where now if you go to a church, generally they're sort of autonomous churches themselves. The congregations themselves make the decision in those sorts of democratic Protestant churches. And you're left with like no distinguishable like singular church. Because when people sort of are allowed to disagree, they disagree all the time and on everything. And so it's impossible to sort of, keep any kind of like consistency. And now to my examples, which is more like flag. Vatican II. So, what do people know about Vatican II? Do you want to like say what they think Vatican II was?
Changed from Latin to Eastern.
Yes, go straight forward. Yeah.
I think that was the big one, like streamlined mass, and not all Catholic churches took it up, so you still get some old ones.
Yeah.
Split away.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was talking about before. It's just, yeah. So basically, I mean, the central changes were mass was said in English, priests turned around, and it opened up a dialogue with like other denominations. And you're right, and like there are groups of people who go Vatican II was just like fundamentally wrong. Shouldn't have happened. It was just like liberals getting into the church and like changing stuff.
James, when did this happen?
It happened in the 60s. So it's difficult. Like, so Vatican II was the council, but like the mass actually changed slightly later than that. So it was actually a gradual process. People think that the mass changed at Vatican II. Totally misconception, but it's not a distinguishment which is that important. Yeah. So this is in the 60s essentially. And it was a gradual change too. All these things didn't happen like bang. They were slowly introduced. And so, yeah, one of the other things was like there was a big emphasis on like social justice. And you're right, like a lot of people just said, we don't accept Vatican II, we think it was wrong. But not that many. Like, there's one church that does that in Melbourne. And the thing is there's one church in Melbourne which kind of goes, which says Mass in Latin because you're still technically allowed to. I have friends there, I go there sometimes, cool people. And they just say Mass in Latin, but they're still like part of the church. They're not like separate. But then you do get people, so a group called Pius X, and they literally like have separated themselves from the church and say there's like no popes and 5% as being real. And then you have groups like even further, go like no popes have any authority and are even more conservative. But these aren't like major players in the church, right? These are like maybe account for 0.02% of like Catholics. Most Catholics generally buy Vatican II. And you will get some people like there are some people who will tell you that like the Freemasons were at Vatican II and were trying to destroy the church, or that like Protestants were there, or the CIA. Like there's a lot of like amongst like conservative Catholic circles, there are a lot of like conspiracy theories about why the church changed and like who influenced it. None of them are real. Essentially, like they're just not real. And one of the big ones is like people think that like a Protestant, like they say Protestants were like invited to join in the conversation. They weren't. They were observers, and like it was just a courtesy that happens at any major gathering like that. But like people who generally want to hold on to conservative ideas can have a habit of like grasping onto that and like holding onto it because they need to believe that something was wrong and that their church couldn't actually do this. And I think that raises an important point too, is that like when you have like religious reforms, you upset people and you radicalise people, and to a certain degree you make people go crazy. But it's just the reality. But the main point I want to make about Vatican II is that like despite what some people think, and some people hold up as this great example of religious reform, it wasn't really that much of a reform. So aesthetically things changed, but the core doctrines didn't change. And so there was a re-emphasis on social justice, and so there were all these documents talking about why social justice is really important coming out of Vatican II. but they all reference like earlier documents. Everything that Vatican II says sources an earlier source in the church. And so it wasn't a case of like the church is like now changed its stance and everything. It was more a case of we're going back to what we should have been doing before. And so it wasn't this major shift. Having said that, there can be major shifts, and they're more likely to happen in like Protestant churches. So the ordination of women like started in the 70s, and essentially, so it was part of like the wider feminist movement. And because those churches were democratic in their nature, it meant that they could actually become. It meant that those changes could actually force themselves through. Because where in the Catholic Church, when someone said we should have female priests, the bishop was just like, no, and that was the end of the conversation. In a democratic church, you had people go, we're going to vote for this. And they did, and they won. And so what you had was that you had people begin to ordain women. Although it's important to note that in Australia, not every archdiocese has female priests. I don't know which ones don't, but there are certain ones which still don't ordain women. And that leads to the point that there was like a major theological break from the past. So before, the Anglican Church especially had said, we will only have male ministers, for similar reasons to the Catholic Church. And then they said, now they changed it. They said, no, we're going to go this whole way, we think we were wrong before, and now we're going to change. So it was a major change. But again, they justified it by saying, this is like our original, this is what we should have done before, and this is what the Anglican Church should be doing. We're not changing what the Anglican Church believes, we're adjusting our practices based on our beliefs. But then the reality is that this caused like massive backlash. So you probably don't see that much of it anymore. But at the time, it was massively decisive. You had bishops like fighting with each other. One of them saying this is right, one of them saying this is wrong. You had churches broke away from the Anglican Communion. And it's one of the reasons now you have like in America, you have like the Anglican Communion, but then you also have like the conservative Anglican Communion. You have the Episcopalian community. You have lots of these communities, and it's all because they suddenly like disagree with each other on certain various things. And a lot of them came through the 70s when they started like ordaining women priests. The other thing is that like evangelicals, as a result of this, even though they weren't necessarily involved, it drove them to the right because they saw that their own like fellow Protestants would become liberal, and so the response that everyone has when you see that your friends are becoming liberal, you just naturally become more conservative. You go, the only way I can fight liberals is to become more conservative myself. And that's why in America you have like this now two distinct like religious camps between the religious people, between like, the strictly conservative religious people and the non-religious people. The non-religious people. The non... that's right, yeah. The non, like, the liberal Christians and, like, hardcore conservative Christians. Liberal Christians generally vote for Obama, conservative Christians generally wish that Romney wasn't the candidate for so, yeah, that's my presentation. Are there any questions?